for, and this is not something that you need to know, so don't be furiously writing. I'm just sharing because this is my background. So he says there are 3 core conditions for developing this relationship. He says the first is unconditional positive regard, which basically is no matter who the person is, no matter what their life experiences are, no matter what they've done, no matter what the situation is currently, you unconditionally value them for who they are. You give them positive regard. That does not mean that you agree with their beliefs or their decisions or their actions or any of those things, but you are able to give them a positive regard regardless of what your differences are, what your beliefs are, whatever. It is true, genuine other orientation. And so, if we're talking about being other oriented, unconditional positive regard is the most apropos phrase for that. Just as an aside, the other core conditions are respect and genuineness. And so if we're talking about being genuine, that is crucial for developing a communication relationship where language can be effective. So if we're avoiding detachment, empathy is the backbone of supportive relationships. And one of the reflection options last week was the difference between empathy and sympathy. And so I appreciated that some of you kind of shared your thoughts about that. Empathy is one of the foundational elements of good relationships, and it's the ability to understand the feelings of others and to predict the emotional responses that they might have to different situations. And I'd kind of like to get your thoughts on that, because that's just my take on empathy. And so you may not agree, and that's okay. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Do you think that's true? That if you have empathy for someone, you have the ability to understand their feelings and predict the emotional responses that they might have? So share with me what you think about that. And then the opposite of empathy is neutrality. And the neutrality is being indifferent or being apathetic. And so if we're talking about a backbone of a supportive relationship being empathy, if you have neutrality in a relationship, things are not looking good. And I'm curious what you think. What is worse, defensive or apathetic? And I have my personal thoughts, but I'm actually going to not share those with you. I would like to hear what you think is worse and why. So in a relationship, do you think it's worse to be defensive or apathetic? And why? Explain your rationale. Okay, so being flexible. Avoid being always right. Why do most people not like that? What do you think is triggered in us when someone has that I'm always right attitude? I mean, there is certainly that type of personality, and I think we all kind of overarchingly respond the same way. And so why is that? Why do you think that triggers in us that response? And the I'm right, you're wrong attitude, again, we go back to the defensive climate. There are so many things that language creates, and defensiveness is certainly something that our words can evoke. And so we need to be very careful with the language that we use, because if we don't want to constantly be in a defensive state or in an argumentative state or in a conflicting state, that's really important. So instead of saying, I'm right, you're wrong, an option might be, I may be wrong, but it seems to me. And notice that's an I statement, important, and it leaves room for others to have a different opinion. So if you say, you can think that you are right as the day is long, but if you say, I may be wrong, but it seems to me, you can still believe with all of your little heart that you are right as rain. But even if you present it in that way, the other person does not automatically respond defensively, and they're able to say, well, I think, and then you can have a dialogue. So presenting yourself as equal rather than superior kind of continues with that thought. You antagonize people by letting them know that you view yourself as better or brighter. And, we talked about that antagonistic climate. The way that we speak can either help or hurt us. And so if we have responsibility and authority to manage others specifically, pulling rank does not usually produce a cooperative climate. So there will be times when we will be in charge or we will have responsibility. We will be managing a situation, we will be managing individuals, whatever the case may be. And that's not necessarily in a business context. That can be in a school project, it can be in a club, it can be in a sports team. There are always going to be situations and opportunities where we're in charge of things. Pulling rank makes people defensive and it makes people frustrated. And so make sure that we're considering the idea of presenting ourselves as equal. We're not always. I, as a professor, am not equal to you as students, but that does not mean that I present myself as someone who is better or brighter or superior than you, because I'm not. I'm just another person sharing ideas, just as you share ideas with me in the reflection. And your experiences have given you insight that I don't have, and vice versa. And so, it's important that we constantly keep that frame of reference in mind. And also, make sure that we don't use abstract language to impress others. What I mean by that is, there are times when we can try to communicate things about ourselves that we really want people to think, wow, that was impressive. And the more abstract we try to be, where we talk in circles and we try to sound really intelligent and intellectual, it actually can be confusing and off-putting. And so we need to make sure, remember we talked about language is either abstract or concrete. Concrete language is the easiest to understand. So if we want to impress others, it's best to try to be concrete and just appeal to senses, because that's what people understand. When communicating with someone from another culture, use conversation that incorporates many words and various ways of describing an idea or concept to communicate its meaning. And so, when we're talking with someone who does not necessarily have our worldview, does not share our experiences, sometimes maybe not even have a native understanding of the language, conversation that uses lots of words so that if they don't understand one word, they can understand another, a variety of ways of describing something. So, my husband likes to use the phrase, there's more than one way to skin a cat, which I think is awful. But, there are so many ways that we can describe something or communicate something. And so, let's not get stuck in this concept of, to the point, let's just get it out and be done, especially when we're trying to be culturally sensitive. Other orientation means that we consider where other people are coming from, and we would expect someone to try to communicate with us in a way that we can understand if the tables were turned. Providing emotional support can be an underlying goal for creating a supportive rather than defensive communication climate. So, excuse me, there's something in my throat. So if we're providing emotional support, that can be something that we are not necessarily actively working toward, but if we're trying to be a supportive individual in a relationship, the emotional support is going to play in as well, which is going to eliminate the defensive communication climate, which we've talked about. Appropriate humor can also be used to turn a tense or potentially conflict-producing situation into a more supportive, positive conversation. And I caution that it needs to be appropriate. I think sometimes, especially when people are very uncomfortable with conflict, they will use humor almost as a nervous outlet or because they feel very awkward, and then it just seems to make things worse. And so I caution you that if you truly have an appropriate humorous anecdote, then great, but don't think, oh, you know what, Brenna told me that if I'm in a tense, conflict producing environment, I should try to use humor. If you're not funny or if you can't pull that off, don't. It's just better to not try that. Okay, so one of the things that I would like you all to do is work to change defensive climate strategies into supportive ones. So under assignments, and at the end of this lecture, I will actually go with you and show you where it is so you're not wondering what I'm talking about. But under assignments on Blackboard, you will find a link to a sheet of 15 phrases, and I think it's listed Chapter 5 activity. There will be 15 phrases on that sheet, and I would like you to choose 3 of them to rephrase. So you will see immediately they are very defensive climate phrases. And I'd like you to rephrase 3 of them. You can choose any 3 of the 15 in your reflection post to a supportive climate phrase. And I'll show you where they are at the end. So we are, give or take, between half and 2/3 of the way done. So if you need a break, feel free to pause me and I will be here when you come back. Okay, so short activity. On your piece of paper, please write down, I said small pieces of paper because I did an activity in class with this, but don't worry about it. You can write them all on the same sheet of paper. Write down an animal that climbs trees, a summer activity, a former president, a movie or TV star who is no longer living, a thing that grows, and a religious holiday. So first thing that comes to your mind when I gave you those 6 things, write them down on your piece of paper, and okay, we'll get to that later. Yeah, just for right now, leave them on your piece of paper. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about what words mean. So I'm going to do a word association activity with you. This is a very activity-rich lecture, so you're going to be doing lots of stuff with me. So I'd like you to do 4 to 5 short responses for the following words. Dog. 4 to 5 short responses. Date. The first 4 or 5 things that pop into your head from these words. Home. Job. School. Bad. Love. Okay, so word association is typically a psychological type of thing, and I'm not going to analyze your responses in any way, shape, or form. But the intention behind this activity is, what do words mean? We talked about there's connotative meaning, right? So it's subjective, it's personal, it's emotional. So every single one of us is going to have different associations with those words, which means they mean different things to us. So I'll quickly share with you. If I did this activity and the first thing was dog, I would say Toby as my first one because that is my dog. I would say Daisy because that is my other dog. I would say Beagle because both of my dogs are beagles. I would say 4 legs. And I would say spotted because beagles are spotted. And so obviously all 5 of those were very specific to me. Now, I could have also talked about the dogs I had when I was a child, or the dogs that my parents have right now that I grew up with until I moved out. But in every frame of reference I have, there's a personal connection to what that word means. So